little bit bored, so let's talk about a couple of things. We discussed that this is basically a completely stock 2008 JKU. It does have Rubicon tires and rims and rock rails. The engine and transmission have been replaced, but everything else is pretty much original. And it does have 115,000 miles. Let me mention that we left Vegas 63 miles ago, and we're still on full. I have got 22 miles to the gallon out of this JK with a 5.3, and it does run on regular gas. But in general, it's going to get closer to 20 on the highway if driven at normal speeds. If you drive it faster, it'll drop a little bit. Around town, 16, 17 is not unusual. I'm hoping you can see this dash deck here. I want to go over some of the, we'll go over this page first, and then later down the road we'll look at some other ones. Oh, looks like the Rosie's Bar and Grill out here in the middle of nowhere burned down a few years ago in Arizona, and looks like they might have rebuilt it. Okay, so if we look at this dash deck, let's start with the top left, 190 degrees. That's coolant temperature, Fahrenheit. I think there's a misconception that guys think that you have to run these engines at 160 to 180 degrees cooler thermostats. The reality is modern engines are designed to run a little bit hotter, 195 plus for most engines, and that's not only for thermal efficiency, emissions output. There's other reasons to get the engine up to temperature, tolerances in the engine, and running it too cool is not a good thing. Now we're running at 189 to 190, which is actually below the thermostat. The thermostat's at 195, and the reason is simply thermal efficiency. This cooling system, even with the stock radiator and the aluminum block, is moving a lot of heat, and that allows the engine to run slightly below the thermostat on the highway. Again, I've had this Jeep in temperatures well above 120, and it will get up to 220, 230, which is not unusual for an LS. An LS can run 230, 40, 50, even 260. It'll enter a hot mode at about 270, 275 degrees, and I've seen these LSs run 300 degrees with no damage. You're not going to want to do that with an iron engine with aluminum heads, or an overhead cam, or a Hemi engine, even with all the parts they have. They're more susceptible to heat damage. The NASCAR guys are running 40, 50 pound radiator caps, pushing these things 260, 270 degrees, and the LS will take it. So if you're running 200, 210, 220, that's normal. Don't worry about it. Even if you hit 230, 240, there's no worries there. If you're constantly running 230 plus, the Pentstars are running at 230, 235 on a regular basis, then you might want to think about cooling it down. Maybe your thermostat's not opening all the way, or going to a cold air hood. But most of the LSs, we don't have that issue. So now let's go to long-term fuel trim, bottom left. It's at 0, and of course that's perfect. Your engine has both long-term and short-term fuel trims. The long-term fuel trim is simply the addition of the short-term fuel trims. So if your fuel trims are running at constantly -2, -3, then that means it's pulling a little bit of fuel out of it. The base calibration is a little bit too rich. If it's +3, +4, that means it's a little bit lean, and the operating system's having to put fuel into it. Now, these Generation 4 based LS controllers are nothing like the earlier ones. The tuners in the old days, that remember the old block learn tables, the 128, 0 to 256, 128 being in the middle. and then you could set that number. Forget about all that. These new Generation 4 computers are coefficient-based fuel tables, and what that means is there are hundreds of variables, coefficients they're called, that are calculated many times per second to generate the fuel strategy. That includes things like coolant temp, intake air temp, four-wheel drive or not four-wheel drive, transmission gear. There's just so many variables that come into play. They're all multiplied together, and then you come up with a number. Now, some of the tuners like EFI Live and HP Tuners have come up with virtual fuel tables that mimic the old tables, so tuners can go in there and change them, change the numbers using a BEN or a BEN number, base efficiency number, which is basically multiplying the table by a number and then coming up with a result that you want. So don't think that these Gen 4 computers are simple. They're not, and that's why tuning them is can be a little more difficult than the earlier computers. And one of the reasons we like to stay with the stock calibration. So let's come back to our dash DAC, and you can see we're still at 0, which is great. Let me switch over here a second to another screen. What we're looking at here is the O2 sensor switching and our throttle position sensors, and I'm going to get back into that in a minute, but let's go back to the other screen. Okay, engine RPM and speed are pretty fundamental. You can see we're running at 1,570 RPM at 65 miles an hour, and you can see we're at 65 on the dash. And if I had my GPS open, you'd see we're exactly at 65.